I left my corporate job in October of 2022, so almost a year ago, which is crazy to think about. And honestly, I didn't have anything planned. My job was really toxic, negative environment, somewhat unethical, if we're completely honest.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Behind the Scenes. I have my lovely guest, Katie Carson, with me today, and I'm so excited for you to hear about her journey and her story. So, Katie, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to let you kind of like tell us how you got started and what you do because it always is better coming from the guests.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emma, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Katie Carson. Like she said, I live in East Tennessee, dog mom to Archie. If you follow me on any of my socials, that's a lot of content that you'll see, even on my business page, because it's who I
Yep.
am. But what I do is I like to call myself, I'm a fractional CMO, but I like to kind of refer to myself as like an intuitive marketing strategist. Because what I really help people do is kind of break free from the one size fits all marketing strategies that they get in courses or whatever that maybe just don't fit the way they work or their business. And really find a way for them to show up for themselves and their business that feels good to them, and also create space for them to follow their intuition, because that's kind of a journey that I've been on for a really long time. Yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. The story is long and winding.
It's okay. We want to hear it because that's what it is all about on behind the scenes is how did you get started? What brought you into the online space? I always love hearing what like made people transition.
Yeah, so I left my corporate job in October of 2022, so almost a year ago, which is crazy to think about. And honestly, I didn't have anything planned. My job was really toxic, negative environment, somewhat unethical, if we're completely honest. And it just wasn't in line with my values or how I wanted to show up or who I wanted to be. And so I made the decision to leave, and I started just kind of building the plane as I went, as they say. I,
Yep.
I've done event planning in multiple jobs in past lives, so I started doing some of that on the side, started doing some marketing, management for a client that was referred to me, and just kind of really started building on that. I really leaned into my network because, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, my career history is crazy. But I really started leaning into my network and just the connections and really building genuine connections with people that then led to not only paid work for me to help me make ends meet, but also helped me really figure out where I wanted to go. So it's kind of evolved, and like I just launched like the most recent iteration of this, right? Like it takes a while to get
Right.
in your groove.
Oh
So I
yeah.
went from like focusing primarily on content repurposing, which is a great asset to any business owner, like learning how to make a piece of content go farther than just one post or one email or one
Yep.
video. It's super important to prevent
Mm.
burnout, and also because it takes at least 7 times of somebody seeing your content before they even engage, right? Like it's a long
Right.
game. It's not an instant gratification thing like social media would lead us to believe. I
Right.
started out with that, and then it really moved more into the strategy world. What I really found was that I really was drawn to those who were more intuitive in their approaches to their business, were less about the hustle culture and more about
Right.
how can they help people, and how can they help people in a way that's authentic to them, and helping other people show up in a way like in their authenticity. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today, is now I help build strategies for those entrepreneurs. I come alongside them. Um, and I want my services and expertise to be as accessible as possible. I like to say I'm not gatekeeping anything. Like I will have
Yeah.
a 30-minute consultation with anybody for free. Like, you can come and, like, ask me all the questions. Like, I'm not here to gatekeep it. And I wanna
Yeah.
make sure that no matter where people are in their journey, they have access to the help that they need to take their businesses to the next level.
I love so much about that. And I would want to ask you about, so you are ex-McKinsey, you're ex-CIA. Is that kind of what you did in those roles, was marketing, or like was marketing a love that you found after the
So,
burnout and all of that?
marketing was kind of a first love that I came back to. I actually studied it.
Okay.
I studied,
Okay.
international management and marketing with a second major in Spanish, in college. That's what my bachelor's is in. I even did a study abroad for 3 months in Spain doing marketing for a little family-owned bodega, which was
Oh my
the
gosh.
the coolest experience and, like, the most cultural shock ever. Like, I was always the first person, like, waiting for the doors to open. Everybody's just, like, strolling in and then, like, strolling back to
Ah,
get coffee for, like, an hour. I was like, "This is wild." But it was
right.
such a cool experience. And then when I came back, I graduated in 2009, so it was, like, the peak of the recession, and I'm from Florida originally. Don't hold that against me, but, um I don't claim it often. But they're really the only jobs available in Florida at the time, especially were tourism jobs. Things weren't remote. And so the job market was just really bad. I was fortunate enough that through my network and connections that I had made with people through my various, I worked like multiple jobs during college. Um,
Ah,
and so through those jobs, I was able to get a paid internship doing marketing for a workman's comp company. But at the end of that internship, they were doing layoffs and I hadn't found a job. And I was like, I need a fresh start. So I packed my car, transferred Outback Steakhouses, and moved to Washington, D.C.
oh
So that
my.
was like a big culture shock. But there was just a lot that kind of went into like a lot of they weren't coincidences by any means. Like it
Gotcha.
really felt like everything just kind of worked out in a way where it was like meant to be. And so I did that. I waited tables at Outback and the Cheesecake Factory for a long time. And then I became a contractor with Homeland Security. So I started out with like administrative work and then I moved in
Okay.
our ops desk where I helped manage the "If you see something, say something" campaign. So, you see it all over New York, especially like post 9/11, of course, world that
Yeah,
we
yeah,
live
yes, yes.
in. A lot of that we helped roll it out to various cities and areas and things like that. And I was kind of like the project manager from like the Homeland
Oh my
Security side to kind
gosh.
of help get that out with like our field guys because we managed the people in the field. Um, and then
Yeah,
from
that's
there I moved yeah, and then from there I moved into the intel community. So I worked at, the CIA. I was in the spy wing. I'm now like 10 years out of it, so like I feel a little better talking
well, we don't have to talk about anything you can or don't want to talk about.
Right.
I just
There's
think
a
it's
lot I can't
super
talk about,
cool.
but essentially what I did was I was a program manager.
Okay.
But that taught me a whole lot about who I was and what was really important to me and what I wanted my life to look like and what I really didn't want it to look like. It lying to everybody is actually really draining. Surprise.
I
So,
bet.
after a couple of but I learned so much about how people think, I could literally talk to a wall, like, about anything, especially after that, but I just really learned, like, I valued authenticity more than I thought I did, realized
Gotcha.
I did, and so that's when I left and I moved to McKinsey& and Company, and there I did professional development programs. So helping people
Okay.
like learn and like grow in their soft skills as well as like hard skills, right?
Right.
But I learned a lot about coaching and like a lot about like different types of personalities and those types of like assessment tools, but the difference was, like, at the CIA, those same assessment tools were used kind of like they twisted it to, like, justify the job you were taking.
Mm,
"Oh, you're perfect for
gotcha.
XYZ." And then at McKinsey, it was also like a box that they put you in. Like, you wore it on your name
Right.
tags at training programs. like ENFP or
Oh,
like whatever it is. And it was like a total thing. And I just really hated that. And
yeah.
I was traveling like 75% of the time. Um,
Oh my gosh.
so it was a lot. And I got really burnt out and ended up having to take like some medical leave to kind of like recover, and
Oh my
like another like reassessment point for me, right? Like, am I building a life that I want to do long term? And so that's when I got back into marketing, my first love, with the
God.
company that I was at. So I did employee experience, internal communications, and then eventually I got into social media and our trade show management.
Mhm.
And I learned so much and it was great.
Yeah.
And it just kind of reignited that spark and helped me bring all of my experiences together into one. And
Together.
that's kind of how I got to where I am today. It's a very long and winding journey.
It's a very interesting journey. I would say that there's a lot of lessons learned in that journey, since that's what a lot of what we talk about on the show is lessons learned. And you kind of already alluded, well, you brought up authenticity and intuitive marketing, and sometimes there are not just in corporate life, but in the online space as well, because it is like the wild, wild west. There's not as much structure, there's not as much
Mhm.
regulation that has to happen. What have you seen or lessons learned have you kind of come across in your experience with companies that maybe aren't marketing authentically? Like, could you maybe share some examples for the audience so that they can understand, like, authentic marketing isn't talked about enough?
It truly isn't, because so many of us are fed the narrative that we need to like beat the out, like we need to, you know,
Algorithm.
master the algorithms, right? But
Yep.
my stance is the algorithms are always going to be changing because the companies want us to continue to engage more or be more on that platform. They're going to change weekly, monthly, whatever. But the real key to like your long-term success in your marketing is doing something that is consistent and sustainable for you over the long run. Now that may change seasonally based on where you are in
Right.
life. Like if your kids are home for the summer versus when they're back in school, like it may look different. But if you set a
Yeah.
baseline for like how often you want to show up on a specific platform, and I recommend, especially if people are starting out, pick one, figure out where your
Yeah.
audience is and focus 90% of your effort on that one platform. Become an expert in it. Um, and
Right.
that will create a bank of content for you to pull when you're ready to expand into other platforms. But if you try to take on everything at once, you're not going to do it, right? We're going to get burnt out.
Yeah.
We're not going to show up. So sustainable consistency is the best long-term strategy for your marketing, period. Whether it's email, blog, like you set a attainable baseline. If you hit it, great. You showed up the way you said you would. And if you exceed
Yeah.
it, that's even better, but you don't have to exceed it every week. Like give yourself that space
Yes.
and give yourself the space to adjust. Marketing is about trying things out and seeing what lands, seeing what works, right? Like, and that's why I'm such a big proponent of content repurposing, because it's not just about the topic or what you're saying about it, it's how you're presenting it. One piece may not do great with like a static graphic, but it may kill with a reel, or it may kill with
Right.
a carousel. Like it may kill with just like, you talking on your stories. Like it really depends on, like if you're enjoying what you're doing and showing up doing it, you're going to be
Right.
more likely to do it and people are going to be more likely to buy from you. So if you feel like you have to show up in reels, but you hate them, people are going to feel that. People are going
Yeah.
to, like people want to buy from people.
Yes.
They, especially in the online world, we're not necessarily looking to work with these huge companies, right? Like that's not our goal.
No.
We build authentic connections with each other and we want to use like help each other in that area.
Yeah.
And if you show up as a whole person and are vulnerable with like what's happening, I'm not saying share all your biz, right? But like you can
That's
say
the
like
balance.
here's the balance. But like if you show up and be like, guys, I'm just not feeling it today. And that's fine. But that may resonate with somebody who's your ideal client or somebody
Mhm.
else that builds a connection with them. that leads into a deeper conversation. It's not about cold DMs, it's about authentic conversations and relating one to another.
When it comes to, you mentioned like the content repurposing bank, and you mentioned, we just obviously talked about the authentic piece of making sure that we're coming from a place of our intuitively who we are and what we enjoy, and not, I cannot tell you how many businesses I've worked in as an ops person where their marketing does not match the internal pieces of their business, or they don't align
Mhm.
truly. Like the marketing, it looks very different than what the client journey or the experience or the results kind of are. So I have, I guess, two questions on this. So we'll go with the easier one first, and then we can come back, kind of jump back to how we stay authentic and how we stay, or how we get intuitive. But I think the first thing the audience would be wondering is, how do they come up with these topics? Like, where is the balance? Like, what do you suggest is a good balance between, I know this is different for everyone and their audience and their industry, between educational or, personal, like in tying those personal things back to business, or just, content or topic generation, I feel like is a huge hurdle for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the things so I work with a lot of clients and we talk about this a lot, right? Like figuring out what their
Mm.
content pillars are. And again, marketing's about trying things and figuring it out. So like you can you can change your content pillars. You're never stuck with them forever. And in fact,
Right.
I suggest you revisit them at least quarterly to like see like is
Yeah.
this where I'm at right now? Is this so the question I mainly have my clients ask themselves are two things. One, what are you passionate about? What gets you amped? What do you love to talk about, right? Like if it's
Yeah.
something like if you're super passionate about like not being in hustle culture, or you're super passionate about like showing up authentically, talk about it. Like you can talk about it in so many different ways that it's like a
Yeah.
limitless like big bundle opportunity. And if you don't know where to start, if you're an auditory processor, I recommend a voice note or a talk to text and just start going, right?
Yep.
Write it all down, and then you have a place to start. You're not staring at a blank page. If you're a written processor, just start pounding out some notes,
Yeah. Yeah.
handwritten or virtually. But that's a really good way. Like brain dump. Don't feel like it has to come out as a perfect thing. Brain dump everything that like you just go on it, like free write.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I ask is like, what does your audience want to know about? Because that's
That's a good one.
key, right? And market research, I feel like, is this big scary thing, but it can be just as simple as putting like a
Yeah.
question box on your Instagram story, right? Like, hey,
Yep.
so do you want to know, or a poll? Do you want to know more about this topic? Like, figure out what the people want, or if there's people who regularly engage with your content, ask them. Like, send them a DM and be like, hey,
Yeah.
so I've seen you like, you've really resonated with this topic. Like, what other things would you like to know about? What other questions would you have? I'm trying to make sure that like my content is fitting what my audience wants and what I
Right.
want. There's the balance. It's got to do both. So those are my
Yeah.
two
You want your content to be about them, like, to the
relatable.
extent. Yeah. I think that's so good. I think asking yourself, like, what do they want? And, those questions are important. And ones I haven't heard before in the industry, which is amazing, because there's a lot of, like you said, cookie cutter advice. And it's always, 5 days a week, have your topic, this, and this, and be really rigid. And for me, like personally, I'm going to just share a little bit behind the scenes of how we do it in my business is, I would come up with topics. I hate writing. So I just started doing lives on Instagram, and then I switched it over to YouTube because that was better SEO. It was gonna, like, the content would stay longer. And I was getting all these guests coming on, and then I'm like, they're not even like, people can't find these later, or they're like not searchable, or they're not popping up. So we switched over to YouTube, and for me, that was awesome because I could just say it and talk and brain dump and just like, not brain dump, but like go off on whatever I felt like I wanted to say, and people could still get value. Then we would take the transcriptions and we could put them into writing without me having to write it. So that's like a little tip if you are more of a like speaker than a writer, because I would always just sit down and I'm like, I don't know what to write. I don't like, I could come up with topics, no problem, but like the detail, the meat, the things was hard.
And that's where that self-awareness piece comes in too, right? Like I always
Yep.
this back to my days at McKinsey, we all have different learning styles and processing styles, right? Like it's
Yep.
not just about how you consume content and learn, but it's also about how you process. And so being aware
Yeah.
of what works best for you is going to be what works, is like going to be how you are able to do it consistently in the long run. Build trust in yourself that you can show up in your business and that you can do those things, but also build trust with your audience that you're going to be able to do those things.
Do you have, like, I'm curious now, do you have your clients take personality tests, or do they already know because of your background with McKinsey? Like, do you, because you said you don't like them being in a box, but it does help us understand a little bit of us, but we shouldn't let it be defined. So I'm curious, do you have them take like a certain test to help them with the marketing strategy?
Most of my clients have already taken some sort of, whether it's Enneagram or human
Mm.
design. There's so many tools out there, like nobody can be an expert in one of them, but those are the two that
Oh, yeah.
familiar with outside of MBTI, which I'm not a huge fan of, but those are the two I'm most familiar with, and those are the two my clients mostly use. A lot of them are into like their signs and things like that too, but I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
super familiar. But it does help inform. Like I do ask my clients, like, hey, if you know your Enneagram type, what is it? If you know your human design type, what is it? Because the strategies that we build are going to be different based off of that. Like I'm a
Yeah.
projector of human design, so my energy flows are like this. So it's really important for me to have a bank of content ready to go for those days when I can't, like, I just don't have the energy to show
Mhm.
up like live or
Right. Okay. Okay.
creative like that. That's where my content bank really comes in handy. Like I just kind of like
Yep.
build it out when I have free time and like I can pull from it when I need to so that I'm hitting my baseline of what I want to do and how
Yeah.
I show up. And I'm able to stay consistent without trying to push through something when I don't feel good or don't, have the energy for it, which I think is like a lot to like the corporate masculine energy versus starting to lean into your feminine energy, right? Like
Yeah. That's a big topic.
it's a big topic right now. And for one of my clients, I used to do these client interviews with her clients and
Oh,
that's how we would do like social media because she was a headshot photographer for female executives. So we would share the
gotcha.
person's story and their like life advice along with their photos. And mostly female executives and the collective like advice generally, like, which is so funny because I've been doing these interviews now for almost 8 months, and the collective advice has stayed almost the same. It's, follow your intuition and,
Yeah.
um, don't feel like you have to show up the way that others show up in the business. Like, you get to be
Right.
your full authentic self and bring that to your business, and I was like, the fact that that's the collective lesson just kind of, like, validates everything.
Actually rolls in really well with my second question because you and I had talked before about, my mission and my like background. I think you shared that you have a not a similar background, but similar of trauma. Like my background is came from a huge traumatic thing, and so a lot of my viewers will probably relate to this question. But do you have any tips for getting in touch with art, like to be more intuitive? Because I think I struggle with that a ton. I've gotten a lot better through healing and things like that. But it is sometimes hard to be in touch with what is this act like, what do I actually want, especially if you're a people pleaser, which I know a lot of women are, and a lot of women watch the channel. So how can we bring in that intuitive piece into our marketing if we struggle with, even like I find it hard to like listen to my gut because I always second guess, like I overanalyze kind of thing.
Um, it's been a 10-year journey, at least,
Right.
right? Like, that's when I
Right.
started my healing journey. because for a long time, I just didn't even want to acknowledge that growing up in a household that was super abusive even had an impact on me, right? Like I was like, it didn't affect me at all. So the first step is just,
I think a lot of people can relate to that too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the biggest step that you can make is just starting to acknowledge like it sucked and it impacted me in ways
Yep.
that I'm still figuring out at 36, right? Like,
Right.
and I'm still uncovering and still undoing a lot of that. And so, remembering that it's not a linear process as much as we want it to be. It's gonna be wild and crazy and spiraling at times.
Yeah.
But
Right.
it starts with the little things is what I found.
Yep.
So like if I just all of a sudden have like an idea like, "Oh, I should talk about this." I'll write it down so that like if I'm not in a place where I can do it right then, I have it. But it just starts with those like little things. And I think especially as survivors, we often think that like nobody wants to hear our quote unquote sob story.
Yeah.
Like, that's the story we tell ourselves. Like nobody wants to hear
Yep.
this, but people do. Like I
Yeah.
done a lot of Brene Brown reading and work.
I need to read some more of her stuff.
Her stuff is amazing, especially if you're healing from like trauma. It's really,
Yeah.
really good. It helps. It really helped me to like forgive myself because there was a lot of like self-blame in that, right? Like, how could you not have seen
Yep.
those signs? How could you not have stood up
Yeah.
and done more?
I
So that
relate to
you have
that.
to build that trust in yourself. And I think that's where those like small little steps that you can take, whether it's like, oh,
Hmm.
maybe I should like, I don't know. I had a dream the other night. It's wild. I had a dream the other night that I was on vacation with my cousins and somebody set the temperature at 95 degrees and we all woke up pissed. We were livid. We were livid, like, who did this? And we were like all fighting with each other. And then, like, literally the next night, I was staying the night with a friend. I was visiting and at her family's house, and the temperature was like 85 degrees, and they had like 25 blankets on the bed. I shit you not. But like, I was like, those little things of like, oh, okay. So it's like, being like, you could just dismiss that, right? But being like, "Oh my gosh, my intuition kind of like saw that coming. That is so weird." And just acknowledging
Right.
those little what you think are coincidences happen, the more you'll see your intuition in action, the more you'll be able to trust it, the more you'll be able to recognize when it's your intuition versus when it's your fight or flight response. Because I think that's also a huge, huge struggle. Um,
Yeah. And I think those personality types really help. Like I use the Enneagram in my healing journey, and I think it helps identify, like what you said earlier, is self-awareness. It's all about being
mhm,
self-aware and being honest with yourself. From my journey, that's what I have found, because I will notice triggers, and it's you don't I identify them now in a way that's like with love, not just beating myself up. And I think what you said about it's the little things, my coach calls it habit stacking, where you take make those little changes one at a time, and then this you stack habits on top of each other, to see a big impact down the line. You have to start small so you stay with it. And like you said, you need to build the trust back up with yourself, because you question, like, I missed this, I didn't do this. Like, so do I trust myself? Like, I noticed that the other day that I'm always late. I need to be better about being on time to build better trust with myself. Like that was just like a one weird thing, that I'm like, I can make this, I can commit to this, I can do this. Mhm.
It's really is about building trust with yourself, right? And like I have ADHD and like all of the things. So like habits are not my jam. So it's really about
Yeah.
like recognizing that what works during one time of your life may not work in another too, and like being open to
Yeah.
changing it. But there was something that you said too about that just triggered this for me was like also learning how to be in touch with our bodies, learning how
Oh
to
yeah.
listen and we need to rest and giving ourselves the permission and grace to rest, or learning when
Yep.
a lot of times, especially if it's been physical abuse, we learn to dissociate and detach with our bodies, right? Like I just started getting in tune with my body like after my hysterectomy last year. Like that was I finally was
Oh
like, oh my gosh, my body is telling me so many things. If I will just listen to it instead of saying, suck it up,
Mhm.
buttercup, you gotta show up. You know what I mean? Like
Yep, yep.
I had to give it forced me to slow down and forced me to listen to my body in a way that I had never done before, in a way that I didn't even know
Yeah.
was possible. So now on those days when I need to rest, I give myself that permission to rest. So like this morning, I've had a wild week, and this morning I had my hot lemon water in bed with Archie, and I just said,
Yeah.
"We will get out of bed. We need to get out of bed. I'm not gonna push myself. Like, my body needs this extra bit of rest." And that's okay.
Yep,
And that's okay.
yep. You need to listen to your body. And some people, when you're triggered, the response is, I always thought I had like a fight response until I learned about the fawn response. And after like just observing that, I was like, actually, I think I'm a fawn. Like, I think that is my response is like, I just get so tired and like avoid it. Like, that's
For
just,
me,
I didn't even
it
know that
depends
was a
on
thing.
yeah. For me, I've realized it depends on the trigger. There are certain things that will trigger
Yeah.
my fight, certain things that will trigger a fawn response, especially as I try to, like,
Hmm.
venture out into the dating world, which is a nightmare, but, like, there are certain things that, like, trigger those different responses, and learning to recognize how those feel in my body helped me to learn how to
Yeah.
even just name my emotions because I was disconnected from those too.
That's so true. And I love how you brought it, like just tying it back into marketing is having that content in and having that system, because we're all about systems here, in place so that when you are at an energetic or triggered state, it's not going to be an extra burden or whether it be you're a solopreneur or you have someone helping you, they can access that information and they can help you, which is why I'm such a big proponent of having some type of support in your business when you can, because it's not putting it all the burden on you. And it's not like everyone's so scared to make their first hire, I feel like, but it helps tremendously when you're in those
Oh,
energetic flows and having someone who's a little bit different but complementary to you. And that's a whole nother topic. I've done a video with my mentor on that about personality types and hiring.
yes.
Which that's a whole nother thing. We won't go down that rabbit hole.
Having been having been in, like, employee experience, it's more about personality than it is skill set, I'll tell you that right now. Like, people can learn a skill,
Yep.
but you can't learn compatibility. But what I'll also say about that is it's also about, like, even if you're not in a place where you can hire, have some coffee
Right.
chats. Even if you're an introvert, right? Like, maybe one of your
Mm-hmm.
goals and one of your things, the way you're gonna show up for yourself and build trust is that you're gonna connect with, like, one person a quarter even. It doesn't have to be monthly, but, like, you and I met through a coffee chat. And, like,
Yep.
I have built such a support system for myself and my business, um, through those connections and those relationships, and, like, real friends. I'm actually going to meet one today in real life. I'm so excited.
Ah,
But, like, people who are complimentary, but can also just, like, be a sounding board, and even people who technically should be a competitor with me, right? Like, building
yep.
those relationships. It's not about competition, it's about collaboration.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's, like, why I'm such a big proponent of, like, networking groups, like Next Generation Network. There's so many networking groups out there that are about just lifting each other up and being that support, even if you can't afford to hire somebody on your team. And that's
Yeah.
so important as you build a business.
It is, and I will say joining the accountability group that I'm in now has definitely been the biggest game changer for me, especially with like being finally aware and admitting to myself that I probably have ADHD. I'm not diagnosed with it, but I could see all the tendencies and I was like, wow, that makes sense why I'm so sensitive too, because I figured out that I have something like my mentor calls it rejection sensitivity disorder. So that's something that comes along with being ADHD, and I
Okay.
never knew.
Yep. Mhm.
So I'm
Mhm.
like, that
And well,
makes
and it
sense.
also comes along with, like, complex PTSD too, right? Like, I mean, I'm not,
Yep.
like, a mental health expert by any means, own journey, like, complex PTSD and ADHD often, like, present themselves similarly. I think we make fun a lot of ADHD, right? Like we're able to joke about it a little bit more, but there's a lot of that that
Right.
comes together and it's intertwined, right? Like it's not separate
Mhm.
from your experience. And as women, we don't get diagnosed early. Like looking back now, I can see it even as a kid.
No.
Like I definitely had it, but because I was a straight
Or
A
we don't get
student
diagnosed
and
at
like,
all.
right, right. I have,
Right.
yeah, it's been a wild ride to get
Well, because you
diagnosed. I
like
won't
you
lie to
just
you.
said, you were a straight A student, like, there were no obvious signs that you had behavioral problems because by
Like
society
talk too
standards.
much, right? Like
Yeah.
Katie talks too much and distracts her neighbor, mostly because I finished my work and I got bored. But um,
Yeah.
like those types of things were the ways it shows up in girls are like the hyperfixation or the need to procrastinate and have like a really hot deadline in order to get anything done. Like my parents were always
That
so
was
frustrated
me.
because I would just come home, "Yeah, I have a science fair project due tomorrow. Can we like do that now?" And they'd be like, "You're just now thinking about this?" And I was like, "I've completely spaced it out. Didn't even know it was happening."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
these types of
Yeah.
things.
I have my one big story about that that I think I like look back on is I was in first grade when this happened, and it still is very like it's a core
Core
memory
memory.
where I was like, they had like the reading charts. You had to read so many to go up the thing and you'd get a prize. And I told myself, like, I didn't need to do it. I didn't want a prize. I didn't care. And then, like, the night before, I like went into a full-fledged panic because I was the only one that didn't like go up or whatever. Because I told myself I don't know what the reasoning was, but I just remember my mom got me like cartons of books, like, and she brought them up to me, and I stayed up all night because she was like, I'm not going to just sign the piece of paper that said you read these books. Like, you're reading the books. And so she brought me all these books. And I remember sitting at my dad's desk and like just reading all night to get all the books that like things. Cause she was like, I'm not letting you just not get away with it, you know?
Also where the hyperfixation piece comes in, right? Like
Yeah.
I used to hyperfixate on reading because that was my escape from like the trauma that was happening. And I would stay up
Yep.
all night and finish books. Like I was reading at like a 10th
Yep.
grade level and like the fourth grade because that's what I did. I just read the books and I would just
Uh-huh.
hyperfixate on one or a series or whatever and just like tune everything out. And the next thing I know, it was like dawn. Um, so
I
yeah.
remember many nights like that in high school. I would just
Yep.
like, I'd be like, oh, the whole night is gone.
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh, I should probably get
I notice it now and I'm so bad. Like, I know I'm aware, like I will hyperfixate on a season or a show, like now, like after my kids go to bed on Friday, and then I always hate myself on Saturday, and I know I do it, but like I just hyperfixate on the show and I have to know how it ends. So I get
and that's where
it.
like that giving and the self-awareness comes in, right? Like same thing with like recognizing your triggers. Like you may not recognize for a long time at first that you were triggered and that was like your behavior and the response. But like the more you start to become self-aware, the quicker that response is. And also the quicker you
Mhm.
can give yourself that grace of like, if it's not hurting you or anybody, girl, watch that season of this. You know what I mean? Like if that's like something that brings you joy, whether or not it's a hyperfixation, like I do that with crocheting and like knitting and cross stitching, like I
Oh,
will do it until my hands ache. But it's
oh,
something that brings me joy and it's not like hurting anybody, right? Like it's a way for me, it's almost a form of self-care for myself and
right.
like giving myself permission to do that. As long as it's not like I'm disassociating and like completely ignoring something else, then it's fine.
Yes,
So it's
yes,
learning
that's
how to recognize when it's a disassociation and like why are we disassociating versus just something that you truly enjoy and you want to do to unwind.
yeah. I feel like we've gone down so many tangents and rabbit holes and we are completely away from marketing, but this is so important to like be self-aware so that you can incorporate this kind of stuff because bringing it back to marketing, bringing it back to the personal stories, and like Katie said, you feel like you don't want it to be the sob story, like you don't want to share and it be a sob story, but you do, if you feel pulled to share your experiences with like maybe ADHD or your trauma, there are people out there who do feel like that, whether you see it or not. And not every time you post is someone going to raise their hand and say, like, this was me too. Some of my best posts have been posts about my abuse or sharing my journey, but that we're bringing it back to the balance between my story and the content being about the reader. So that is
Mhm.
something I've struggled with, and it is something that takes time. Like you said, it's not an overnight success to find a good balance of when you write your personal stories or you share these personal stories, when you're comfortable making sure it ties back to something the reader can take away for them as well. Do you have any tips on
Yeah.
like how we can tie those back? Just bringing it back to marketing and then, you know,
I think it's a lot about mindset, right? Like so many times we're psyching ourselves out because a piece of content doesn't do well or we think nobody wants to hear
mhm,
it. But my thing is, and I've talked a lot with my clients about this, is if you feel the pull to share something, somebody else needs to hear it. It may not
yep,
go viral. Like and the engagement may be really low, but somebody saw that needed to be
yep,
encouraged, that needed to know that they were not alone. And I think that that's the biggest thing. We get so tunnel vision on like what our offers are, like hitting their next goal in our business, that we forget that there are other
mm,
people on the other side of this, and that our story matters and so does theirs. And
yep,
so my big thing is just like keeping that in your mind. Like it's not about, if you do everything based on like your engagement, not that it doesn't matter, it does, but like it's not the end all
yes,
be all.
right,
The more somebody sees and resonates with your content or your story, the more likely you are to build that connection, which then could
yes,
potentially turn into business, whether it's a referral, whether it's a long-term client. Like you never know what rooms your name is being said in either, right? Like
that's a
my
good
best
point.
performing post was like the lessons I learned from my hysterectomy on the 1 year anniversary. That was my best year post, my best performing post to date. Um, and it was all about self-awareness, the journey to where I am today, and like giving other people the permission to like speak up as well.
Right,
It's like you're helping give others a voice when you share your story, and however that feels good to you, however that feels safe to you,
yeah,
it it never hurts to
right.
share
And
your
posting it from authentic, like what you said earlier, because people can tell if you're being disingenuous or sharing
yeah.
it for the wrong reasons.
And when people see you, it helps remind people that you are a human. You're not just there to like sell, right?
Yep.
You're not that I'm against cold DMs, I'm not, but like it works great for some people love it, some people don't. Like for me personally, I need to build like a foundation with somebody. And so
Yeah.
the more I post about things that I like, or Archie, or like different life experiences, the more commonalities I can find with people and build those authentic connections. Because I would rather
Yep.
have 100 authentic connections that lead to maybe like one sale than 10,000 cold DMs that,
Yes.
lead to 100.
Yep.
Because it's about like marketing is a long-term game. It's not something
Hmm.
put it. There's no magic bullet. It's showing
As
up
much as
as
people
yourself.
want to believe that.
I know. As much as, even if you have a post go viral, right? Like it's not
Yep.
a long term, it's not a short term instant gratification. And I think that that is a
Hmm.
mindset, especially in the online business world, that has to shift, because we're fed so many of these. Do this, and this, and you'll hit $10,000 a month. But like, how many people are actually?
I hate that advice because it's not, I just think if you try to be like someone else and you take and apply their process, like you should always be tweaking it because it's not going to work for you if there's no differentiation then. There's no reason
Yeah,
for someone to come work with you, and truly there's it might not work because you could be in a different industry, you have different personality, your best client might not resonate with that, like you can't just take what someone says and apply it to your business exactly the same. You have
right.
to make it you.
You can learn a lot from a lot of people. Like, you can learn so much from so many different people, and I fully believe that you should, right? Like, I'm a learner. I think you should always be
Yep.
learning, always growing yourself, but it's exactly it. If it doesn't feel good to you, if it doesn't feel like you, if it's not aligned with, like, who you are and how you wanna show up and, like, the type of people you want to attract, like, the more alignment you're in with yourself and, like, your business, and the more clarity you have on all of that, the more you're going to attract the people that you wanna work with. And, like, I found that in my
That's
own
such good
journey, right?
advice.
Like, I was trying to fit square pegs in round holes and just work with whoever, whenever, and then once I got really clear on, like, what I wanted for my business, what I wanted in my life as a whole, the invitations started coming and the connections started being built, and then I started actually seeing some momentum, but it was a long time coming, and it took a long time of me showing up and being honest about the pivots I was
Yeah.
making or the struggles that I was having, and building those authentic connections in the long run that really led to this.
I think that's something people don't want to hear because they don't want to hear, oh, it took me like this long. They just want instant gratification. Doesn't work like that. Just because I constantly need reminded of this. My husband's great at doing that. But just because you see someone being viral or a success online,
Mhm.
you might not be seeing the whole picture or how long it truly took them to get there. You're just seeing from like a certain point or through a certain lens. So I think that is a really good reminder for everyone that it doesn't have to be a hustle or a grind, but it does take consistency and determination. You can do it um, without burnout, but it's not going to be overnight either.
No, and it's gotta be intentional, right? Like, you have to be intentional with how you're showing up and how aware you are of yourself.
So true. And I know we've gone through so many different topics and we've covered so much and I've enjoyed this conversation and I could talk with you all day about this kind of stuff because I geek out over strategy and personality types and all the things. But for our audience, what would be the one key takeaway out of everything we talked about, or maybe something we didn't even get to cover? What would be the one key takeaway our audience should walk away with?
Find out what sustainable consistency is for you, whether it's the number of times you show up on a platform or using content repurposing to build a content bank, like whatever, find out what works for you and what that means to you, and that will be the key to your long-term success and growth.
Yeah, love that. I think that's just perfect. That's just the perfect advice. I just released some content about that, but from an operations perspective, like you have to have sustainable, I think is the key word. What's sustainable
Mhm.
for you? And what does that look like for you? It's so good. Um, we are going to link all of Katie's socials and the ways to get in contact with her in the show notes. We are also going to link to her content repurposing. Is it a calendar or a guide?
The guide.
It's a guide. Okay. A content repurposing guide to help you with making sure you can take those pieces of content, make them last longer for you, because we're all about systems and we are all about making things easier on ourselves. So you don't have to keep generating new ideas or new topics all the time. Make sure you guys take a look at that and download it so that you can make your content marketing a lot easier on yourself. So thank you so much for joining us today, Katie. I could talk with you all afternoon, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma, it's been awesome.